We have plenty of people whose lives are wrecked, plenty of families whose lives are wrecked because of alcohol.
Because there's one argument.
You know, I'll testify to that. My father was an alcoholic, and my family was severely harmed by alcohol. So, Bill Bennett, why weren't you calling for prohibition of alcohol when you were drug czar back in the 80s? Why isn't the harm that's demonstrated by alcohol, proven, everyone knows how much harm it can cause, why isn't that an argument for prohibiting that?
That alcohol is potentially a lot more dangerous than marijuana.
It may be. I think if you really examine the arguments, you might want to think about more restrictions on alcohol than opening up marijuana. When you see the effect of marijuana on the brain, particularly the young brain.
You don't want to go back to prohibition.
I don't want to go back to prohibition, but I certainly think the rules on drinking, if they were enforced, for example, on college campuses, where we know what this leads to from time to time, leads to a lot of things every weekend, but some weekends it leads to some of the horrible violence we've seen.
Well, that is true. We do know on college campuses that binge drinking alcohol leads to student deaths, to date rapes, to drunk driving, to assaults, to vandalism, and so on. But when you look at college campuses, I just recently did a story on Notre Dame's policies, but this, Notre Dame's not unique by any stretch of the imagination. Look at the policies for underaged alcohol abuse. Remember, below age 21, alcohol's an illegal drug for you, and the punishments for cannabis. Almost always on any college campus, if you're caught with marijuana, you're kicked out of the dorm, you lose your scholarships. These terrible, terrible punishments are exacted upon you, not to mention the Souder amendments that take away your student loans at the federal level. But when you look at underage punishment for alcohol, in the case of Notre Dame, it would take multiple repeated offenses of being intoxicated and causing problems before they might consider suspending the student. But if they catch them with cannabis, they will suspend the student. So yeah, there's one thing that Bill Bennett's pointing out there. So Bill, why don't we make cannabis legal so these college students who are so tempted to drink and do all of that stuff, why don't we give them the chance to use marijuana instead?
Let me just say a word about the war on drugs, properly understood, not to get into a war with Gil Kerlikowske about the phrase, but if you energize people, motivate people, if you talk about this issue, as Gil Kerlikowske has and will, I don't think the president has enough at all, and I think he should. You can have success. Remember, in 1979, there were about 24 million drug users in this country. This country decided to do something about it. There was a drug czar appointed. The country mobilized. The number in 1992 was 11 million. That's not victory, but from 24 million to 11 million is a big decline. It's now back up to 20 million.
So this is something that Bill Bennett was always really good at, and that's throwing numbers at you to try to confuse you and make you think that his point has any sort of sense to it. 24 million drug users in 1979, 11 million by 1992. It'd be just as relevant to say there were 24 million people wearing bell-bottoms in 1979 and only 11 million by 1992. The correlation here is ridiculous because what he's doing is only picking the very peak of drug use in 79 and comparing it to the very lowest drug use measured in 1992. If we take a look at the war on drugs strategy, however, that's been enacted since 1970, the days of Richard Nixon, we had more drug users going on in 1970, and it increased to 24 million by 1979. So how come the drug war wasn't successful then, when it went up from 1970 to 79? Now, he's going to say the drug war was successful from 79 to 92, probably owing to the fact that he worked for Reagan and also Bush the Smarter. So he's going to point out those 12 years as being effective. But let's also point out that in those years, they were also introducing the crack cocaine dilemma in this country. And that's when our show usually ends. That's okay. We'll turn off the alarm. Go to sleep, you. Thank you. Too many gadgets. But they want to point out that during the Reagan years, it went down from 24 million to 11 million. But after Bush the Smarter left office, Clinton was in office using the same exact strategies of locking people up, and drug use went up in all characteristics. Let me go to the graphs here so you can just take a look at the actual numbers. This is a 20-year graph of cannabis use, the three different lines representing the annual, the monthly, and the lifetime use. So lifetime's at the top, and then annual, and then monthly's at the bottom. All of these graphs have trended upwards or stayed the same since 1988. So over the past 2 decades, marijuana use has either gone up or stayed the same depending on the frequency with which you measure. When we take a look at the other illegal drugs that they are typically focusing on, we look at cocaine, heroin, crack, hallucinogens, meth, and inhalants. You can see how this graph has also tended to trend upward over the past 2 decades. That's right, 2 decades of trending upwards in both of these graphs. So while Bill Bennett wants to make you think that the drug war strategy worked, he's only picking the point in the graph where drug use went down and saying that's where it was successful, and not pointing out that they've used the same strategies for 40 years of the drug war, and we still have just about or more the same number of drug users.
And I think if you press right on this thing, don't fall for the siren song of legalization. And I applaud the drug czar on that. And going out to California and fighting this issue, you can get those numbers back down. And that's what you want. You want the numbers down, not up.
Let me pick up with...
Okay, let's say that we do want to see the numbers of drug users going down. Certainly for hard drugs, I'd appreciate that. For cannabis, I don't care whether it stays the same, goes down, or goes up, since cannabis is non-toxic to its users and pretty much harmless to society. But let's actually take a look at government policies that have caused drug use to gone down. This is the graph of alcohol, cigarette use in America. Red lines for alcohol use, purple lines for cigarette use. All of these lines have gone downwards. The tobacco lines have gone downwards because of a public service campaign against tobacco, the lawsuits against the tobacco companies that help to fund things like truth.org, getting out the actual scientific facts about tobacco. The red lines for alcohol use have gone down, partially because of the Mothers Against Drunk Driving campaigns and the public campaigns for increased safety, but also just because people are realizing that drinking has harmful side effects if you engage in it too much. Notice both of these are the legal drugs, and nobody had to be arrested or have their lives ruined and their property taken away from them in order to get those numbers to go down.
One point that Bill just made, in your mind, and you're an authority on this, is alcohol potentially more dangerous than pot?
2 points. One, alcohol does cause more problems than marijuana, but alcohol is legal. If you make marijuana legal...
Minute. Okay, so he's trying to tell us that alcohol is more harmful because it's legal, or it's harmful but it's legal so we don't have to pay attention to it. Again, if alcohol is harmful like you're saying it is, then why not ban it? Because apparently that's our policy. We ban things that are harmful. You're claiming marijuana is so harmful. If alcohol is harmful, then why aren't you banning it? No, the reason alcohol is more dangerous has nothing to do whether it's legal or illegal. If you drink a quart of whiskey, you will die whether that whiskey is legal or illegal. Alcohol is more dangerous because it is toxic, and it is because it is highly impairing, and because it is addictive.
It will therefore become much more widely available, and therefore the damages and detriment to society and to individuals would continue to increase. But let me mention also, President Obama is actively engaged in this. When I met with him and he gave me some directions to get the voice of the American people into this strategy, that's what's in there. When I briefed him a week ago about the strategy, he could not be more supportive.
Well, let's look at this strategy. First of all, how could marijuana be any more available than it is now? Like I said in the earlier slide, we've got 84% of our high school seniors saying it is easy or fairly easy to get marijuana. In report after report from government sources, teenagers say it is easier to get a hold of marijuana than it is to get a hold of alcohol. We find that 69% of high school seniors say they could get marijuana within a day. 25% of them say they could get marijuana within an hour. So how much more available is it going to be when we start checking IDs like we do for alcohol and tobacco, which kids say are harder to get a hold of? And furthermore, about this strategy in more countries going on, I'd encourage everyone to check out NORML.org, and there's a paper that Paul Armentano has written called The Real World Ramifications of Cannabis Legalization and Decriminalization. This actually takes a look at the countries and the states that have reduced penalties, decriminalized, or somewhat tolerated or legalized, like they have in the Netherlands, the use of cannabis. And the facts are in, and shows no major increase in use and a lot of decrease in the harms that we associate with marijuana, the crimes, and so on.
We reduce the demand for illegal drugs in the United States.
Smart education through a variety of trusted givers.
Nancy Reagan used to say, just say no.
She did. And you know, it's a little more complex than that. If parents, teachers, faith community, and neighborhood groups all give young people the same consistent message, and they repeat it about making healthy choices, underage drinking is mentioned in the strategy, the drug problems, and of course if they get healthy choice advice about exercise, nutrition, they will actually be prevented in the future.
This for decades.
Okay, all of those things are good. We want kids to get more education about harmful drugs, alcohol, nicotine, smoking, healthy lifestyle choices, exercise, nutrition, and so on. But like we pointed out at the beginning, the drug czar is required by law to lie about marijuana. So the education that he can give about marijuana, if he was to give factual information about its health benefits, how it can be used for all of the uses that hemp would provide, all the medical benefits we can get for it. If he were to, the nutrition of hemp seed, my God, if he was to point out all of that, it would be obvious to our school children that the keeping it illegal is not any sort of consistent strategy from our government.